More people than you suspect are thinking just like you are. You just don't know it.
SDBullion.com is a high-volume physical gold, silver, and precious metal dealer. Founded in March 2012 with the goal of providing the lowest cost bullion available, SD Bullion has become one of the largest US-based precious metal dealers and is regularly recognized by Inc. magazine as one of America's fastest growing companies. SD Bullion continues to gain industry market share by being one of the premier low-cost options for physical precious metal bullion buyers and sellers. At SDBullion.com, you can order your guaranteed physical precious metal bullion products online, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Discreet, low-cost delivery is both fast and always fully insured. We are committed to being your trusted source for low-cost, highest quality investment-grade bullion products. Visit SDBullion.com for more information.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with SilverDoctors.com, and back with us today is Chris Martenson from Peak Prosperity. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Elijah, it's good to be back with you and all your listeners today.
All right, now I wanted to discuss about 2019 and get a follow-up from our last interview, because you had said in our last interview that really bubbles pop from the outside in, and we were seeing cracks kind of appearing on the outside. If we look at some of the periphery countries, stock markets were collapsing and crises were happening in a lot of the periphery countries. Can you give us an update on this and some of the collapse signs we're seeing right now?
Sure. So let's separate out, I'm looking at economy, energy, and environment, 3E. So just to constrain to the economic E for a minute, we were seeing a lot of signs of distress, particularly all through starting last, let's call it 2018, August or so. We were seeing things like the Turkish lira beginning to collapse. We're seeing spreads, and then finally interest rates begin to take off in the peripheral countries, Argentina, Turkey, Venezuela, obviously, but also South Africa, you name it. And eventually that spreads to the equity market. So that all was proceeding apace. And then, of course, we saw that turbulence come all the way to the core. It spread from the outside in. December was, they call it, volatile, which is code speak for, oh no, stocks went down in price in the core countries.
Now, I remember reading an article you wrote, and you were saying that collapse is a process, not an event. Could you speak to that? Because, you've been predicting for a long time that we are going to see this crisis, but it's not necessarily going to be an event. And I think that's a misunderstanding that some people can have.
Yeah, so an event would be a coronal mass ejection. We get like a Carrington 1859 event, and the electrical grid goes down. One day it's working, the next minute it's not, right? So that's what I think a lot of people imagine when we say the word collapse, but collapse is actually a process. So look at Venezuela. It's a relatively weak country, has very poor systems and institutions, and it's been collapsing for 6 years now. And that's a long, slow process of collapse. So that's kind of how we think all of this is going to unfold. And in fact, we already see, I wrote an article recently that collapse is already upon us. It's happening. And so if we wander into a second E and we look into the ecology or the environmental E, we see a lot of signs of collapse that have been happening for a long time. I've been writing for years, and it's finally come into more mass public consciousness about the disappearing insects, where if you live anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere, you've already noticed, if you've been paying attention, that your windshield doesn't have insects on it anymore. Now, this has hit mass consciousness. They've been writing about it in the Washington Post, in the Guardian, the New York Times, and people get it now. And they say, what happened to the insects? Well, they've been disappearing for about 20 years now. And finally, it's caught on to people's consciousness. And I'm not talking the bees and the colony collapse or the monarch butterflies. Yeah, trouble there. But everything, just the massive insects, to the point that in nature preserves in Puerto Rico, 98% loss of ground insects, right? This is the bottom of the food chain. One does not simply remove the bottom of the food pyramid without eventual consequences. Phytoplankton, same thing. It's down 50% in the last 40 years. It's disappearing. That is the bottom of the oceanic food web. We've had 70 to 80% losses of seabirds, including seagulls, right? Those things were like rats with wings when I was growing up. And now they're like rare treasures because they're literally, I don't see them in the places I go vacationing, and people are reporting this all over the place. But it's not just seagulls. It's all the other pelagic seabirds, puffins and gannets and everything, right? So we're seeing that collapse happening ecologically at the bottom of the food pyramid, and this is a really big deal. So these are trends I've been writing about for 10 years now, and this process has been ongoing. The Ogallala Aquifer Reservoir, underground reservoir levels have been dropping 4, 5, 6% a year. Does it disappear all at once? No, but it is in a process of disappearing, right? So this we're seeing all over the place. So I wrote about that ecologically. And of course, we just recently had the World Economic Forum, otherwise known as Davos, and there all the world's billionaires got together in their jets and talked about the various ways we could get more growth, faster growth, more economic growth, whatever they're looking at. And this is what, when you ask me about the central banks and where are we in the outside-in process, we are in a place where the central banks are desperate to just keep everything growing constantly, including financial asset prices. They are now locked into that paradigm. They're stuck. But meanwhile, over here in the real world, we're seeing the resources that are the true basis of actual economic growth are either disappearing and collapsing as they are with biological systems, or they're just getting harder and harder to find. If gold is your favorite thing, check out what's happened to the ability to find large gold mines. That's a thing of the past. If you want super giant elephant oil fields, we haven't found any in decades, right? So now we're down drilling the source rock, otherwise known as shale oil. It's a retirement party. We're having at it. But anybody who's not reading these signs for what they are is missing this collision, which is an economic system based on fiat money that has to grow exponentially, colliding with a real world that just can't offer the same sweet, high energy, abundant resource, full ecological splendor and grandeur that I saw when I was growing up as a boy. That's gone. So that's the world we live in. This thing that really has to grow, depending on something that's depleting, and in many cases depleted. So that's what we're tracking here. So when I write collapse is happening, it is happening if you know where to read the signs, right? Ancient trees all over the world. These are 2,000 or more year old trees dying on the African continent, in New Zealand, in North America. Nobody knows why, right? Starfish just completely wiped out. In fact, in danger of going extinct. These big, giant, sort of used to be common starfish are just dissolving all up and down the Pacific coast. Again, for anybody listening to this, which one of these things would be enough for you to go, oh, I better pay attention to that? Is it all of them at once? Do you just need one? Tell me when to stop. Because for me, when I look at these things, Elijah, I just go, wow, put these things together, and I don't know how we can possibly ignore these things. But meanwhile, if you're reading the news, you're probably not picking this stuff up. You probably think some high school students in the Washington Mall had committed the most grievous thing, or maybe you're distracted by, whatever's going on politically as they jockey for 2020, or maybe you actually heard about what's going on with yellow vests. I don't know, right? All I do know is that what's really important is unfolding right now, and people need to understand it's happening, it's already here, and they need to start taking steps to prepare for this future that's coming.
Right, and I think when it comes to, as you were talking about the environmental problems we're seeing right now, I think one of the things that, at least for me, and I think this is not a good mindset to have, but I think one of the initial thoughts people might have, and I have had them in the past, is that, it's not really going to have, I can't do a whole lot to do it. I'm just one person out of, millions and billions of people in the world, right? And also, it's not going to have a huge impact on me. And I know that's not a good way to think, and it's more of a selfish way to think. But how can people get outside of that mindset, actually make a difference? And also, it probably will have an impact on us. So if you could talk to those 2 points.
Well, sure. Of course, it's going to have an impact. So the first thing is, have an impact on who? I don't believe that I'm the most important person in the world, and that all that matters is what happens to me. My youngest daughter is now 18. If she lives to the same age as my grandfather, she'll expire in the year 2100, right? So that's pretty far out there, right? And so, when we look at all of these trends going on, we're going to be way past the peak of coal, gas, oil, certainly all sorts of species. It may be by the year 2040 that there are no large land animals left after this period of time we're in. So the question is, what kind of a world are we leaving behind? The motto of my company, Peak Prosperity, is creating a world worth inheriting. So part one, what kind of world do we want to leave behind? Part two, what each person does right now matters a lot. And so we call, in our book Prosper, we break this down into sort of setting the stage for why bother preparing, right? It's not about surviving anything. It's about thriving. And we talk about the idea of necessary but insufficient. Yeah, you know what? If I cut my carbon use to zero, I die, I expire, or I cut it in half, or I lower my footprint by 50%. It's totally insufficient. Doesn't change anything, right? But it's necessary, because that's the only thing that is going to change this story, is if people individually add up to a story that matters. So we have to start talking about what's important and what really matters and why we're here on this planet, right? And I don't believe we're here to just consume as much stuff as we can and leave behind a trash place. Some people believe that. I'm not one of them, right? So now we're at this part of the story that says you and I and everybody listening was born in a really extraordinary period of human history. It's as easy as it's ever been to live, which means we have tons of free time. And the question is, what are you going to do with that, right? If I'm right, times get harder and we spend more and more of our waking hours just getting by with the basics of life, right? Food, shelter, clothing, warmth, all that stuff, right? But, right now we have an extraordinary opportunity to avail ourselves of information. So step one in this story is always get the understanding, get the context necessary to know the world you live in and where it's going. And then two, figure out what are you going to do about that, right? And in order to actually solve that question, you have to kind of answer a deeper question, which is, who do I want to be, right? What role am I going to play? And so that's why necessary but insufficient is a really important concept for us, because even though my actions may be insufficient to really nudge the needle in terms of what, the trajectory of everything, it's absolutely critical that I am the person that I want to be, and that I am conducting myself in a way that is huge integrity, that shows that I care, that shows that my actions are aligned with the world I want to see coming, right? And that's the thing. If I have a huge criticism about the country I live in the United States, is we're totally lacking a strategy at this point. And this isn't just because we have a new president or the old president or the one before. No president in my adult life has had a strategy, which is a very simple concept. A strategy means you know where you're going and you know how you're going to get there, right? You have a vision and you have resources. So we still have some resources, shale oil, coal, stuff like that, but we don't know what we're going to do with it. So we're taking all these resources out and we're just running business as usual a little faster, right? Let's sell some more F-150s next quarter and, let's, put up some more malls or whatever we're doing with it, right? But we need that vision that says, where are we going, right? Where are we going to be when these resources run out? Because they do, right? Do we want to have a bunch of nuclear plants? Do we want a bunch of alternative energy? Would we rather build thorium? Do we want every house to be super hyper insulated so they don't need as much energy? We don't have that vision. And so in the absence of living in a place which has a vision, you got to develop your own. You have to have a clear sense of who you want to be, where you want to be, and how you're going to get there. And so that's really what we're doing by sounding the alarm and showing people that collapse is already happening, is to shake people and wake them and say, look, this is for all the marbles. And by the way, you only get one life anyway. So you got to choose how you want to conduct yourself, how you want to live, and the impact you want to have. Because, we all get one shot at leaving a mark on the world. So big times, big message, and we're asking big things of people. But, welcome to the times we live in.
Now, I remember last time we had you on, you were talking about that you're planning on having a lot of your viewers partake in a weekend without electricity. And this kind of goes to the practice element. You're talking about how, the first step is to get informed about all of this stuff. But one of the other really important things is to have practice. So can you speak to the weekend without electricity and also other things that people can do to practice so that they are prepared?
Well, sure. We haven't conducted that weekend yet. We're still sort of setting up the parameters of it. We can't wait to run the experiment and gather the data. It's going to be a learning experience for everybody. And yeah, anything you practice at, you'll get better at. Anything you haven't practiced, but you think you know, you probably don't at all. So I practice all kinds of things all the time, from gardening to self-defense. I just came back, right before this interview. I was at the range and we were busy practicing all sorts of drills just because it's a good skill. I like to have that one. Or medicine, if you want to know how to practice and be useful at healing, that takes a lot of practice. So our advice to people is figure out which skills you want to get good at and start practicing at those. You can't get good at everything, right? So the things you want to get good at are the things that you're excited about anyway, when you do them, time just magically passes. It means, that's like play. Play is unstructured stuff where awesome things happen and you lose track of time, right? So these should be things that are inspiring and uplifting anyway. And so that's really a message of encouragement we have. So we're running our annual seminars in April. The main seating completely sold out already, but we're looking to see if we can expand that. So I will let people know about that. But that's April 26th, 27th, 28th, Friday through Sunday. And there we cover all 8 forms of capital. Financial capital is one. Living capital, that's your health and the ecosystems around you and how you can expand those. That's another, for example. Social capital. So we're touching on all these different forms of capital, is ways in which people can first take a snapshot, understand how much capital they have there, find the places they feel drawn to have more of, and then come up with the ways that you can actually increase those. And guess what? Every single one of those requires you to do stuff, and doing and practicing are kind of the same thing. So without practice, though, I know people who've said, Elijah, they're like, oh, Chris, if it ever comes time and I'll learn how to garden. No, you won't. It just takes time. It takes years to figure out how to do that well. Or any of these things that we're calling like basic life skills, whether you're thinking you want to raise bees or you want to figure out how to help people navigate emotional trauma, wherever you fall in this story, those things take time, they take practice, they take skill, but they're a lot of fun.
One of the last aspects I'd like to cover is about spreading the word. It's a lot easier to, get informed about this and practice these skills together with the community. So how do people spread the word and get involved in a community of like-minded individuals who are, trying to thrive amidst this collapse that we're seeing?
Well, that's always the trick, because a lot, this is changing. The good news is it's getting easier to find those people. I would think even just a few years ago, the dominant thing that people would report back to me is, Chris, it's really hard to find anybody who thinks this way. It's getting easier and easier to find people. The warning signs have sort of accumulated to the point that if you were in France right now, there's an entire nation in revolt. And again, you may not have read about this because our news has an almost complete blackout on this, but tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people every single weekend coming together, wearing their yellow vests, being treated with extraordinary violence by the police. But why are the people putting up with that, right? Well, it's because they've reached the point of saying, hold on, there's something happening here and we need to get together and address this. And this is happening all over the place, all over the world, where we're seeing that people get it. Right? It's not getting any easier economically. The rich have decided they need to be even richer at the expense of everybody else. They're not even hiding the fact that, that they're going to lie to us in the news anymore, or that they're just going to cram certain political parties and candidates down our throats no matter what, whatever. Right? So for those, and particularly for people who have any attachment left to the outdoors, that the springs have become silent again, and that we need, the outdoors needs our help. And the good news is we're human, so we can, if we choose to put our effort there, we can improve anything we put our mind to. So, part one is I'm asking people really tune the news out, because they're doing a horrible job of informing us about what is important, and they're doing an excellent job keeping us distracted with what isn't important. And that's why your channel and mine and other sort of alternative so-called fringe sites are actually the voice of truth and reason right now, which is time out, full stop. We don't need to be doing more of what we have been doing. We need to start doing brand new and different things. And that's going to be totally different for everybody, depending on their age, their circumstance, their skills and abilities, interests, all of that. But to find the other people who share that passion with you is really a critical thing to do right now. And if I could leave, your listeners with any one thing, it's this: more people than you suspect are thinking just like you are. You just don't know it. And I have the luxury of being able to go out and talk about this stuff publicly. So I see who's out there sharing these concerns. And, by and large, they're very successful people. They're intelligent people. They're old, they're young, they're rich, they're poor. It's everybody. It's just like the Yellow Vest movement in France. If you take a snapshot of that, they're trying to paint it like, oh, look at all those hooligans. But you look at the crowd sometime. Don't see the Yellow Vest. Look who's in there. It's old, young, men, women, all people of different colors. It's literally everybody who's not part of the 0.1 or 1%. It's very broad based. So it's getting easier to find these people, and there are tons of interest groups out there. And of course, if you come by our site, Peak Prosperity, we help people find each other in geographies or by interests, however they want to organize around these things. Because we're about the doing, and we have a great time doing it. We have a real, we just have fun. We get together and do skills-based things all the time. We got another one coming up in July. We're going to go to Joel Salatin's farm with a group of our people. This will be fairly limited. They only have so many they can take on a tour, but go to a working biodynamic farm and actually, help harvest chickens and move, animals from paddock to paddock and feel and do the things that are actually working on a sustainable farming model. That's just, I think, one of the crown jewels in the stories that we have to sort of point people towards. So if you can go and touch it, feel it, eat it, breathe it, and participate in it, you discover that not only is this stuff doable and being done, but it's a lot of fun. And the other people who are drawn to this, guess what? They can talk about more than just the Super Bowl. It's interesting.
Definitely. Well, Chris Martenson, thank you so much for your time today. Before we let you go, Peak Prosperity is the website. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's it. Come by peakprosperity.com. Check that out. We have most of our information is free. We have a subscription service too for people who like to support our cause and go deeper into the details. And as well, check out our events. As I mentioned, we have this seminar coming up in April, and we've got other events that are about the kinds of skill building and experiences that you and I just talked about.
All right. Once again, Chris, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.